Right, so I hope everybody's having a great summer, and I'm really pleased to have Dr. Maria Esteva present on her work on DesignSafe, where she is lead data curator. Dr. Esteva is PhD in information science and is also a research scientist at the University of Texas at Austin. You have known Dr. Esteva a lot through our discussion with TACC and supercomputing, but today she's going to talk a bit more about open science, open data. So, Maria, it's all yours. Thank you.
Hi, well, I hope this is more of a conversation than a presentation. And I was going to talk more about my work in DesignSafe, but then I decided to shift it a little bit and to look more into polar science data curation and machine learning data curation to make it, to cater it more to you and to capture your attention to these, but also to warn you that this is what you should be doing and why. And so I changed a little bit as I was preparing these, and I hope that it'll speak to you a little bit more. So I don't intend to do this. If you need to ask me a question, I don't see you. But if you need to interrupt me or otherwise, we will leave questions for the end. But this is more of a conversation, and I hope that this again inspires you to start curating your data. So first, I need to talk a little bit about the context of this. And so I don't know how much you know about open science. And I have here written a little bit of definitions, which I haven't, of course, made. But basically, the open science movement, which is not new, but it's the umbrella under which open data functions. And what it basically talks is about everybody should be able to access the products of research, the papers, and now the data, the software, etc. And this is why this movement is first, it started with the journal papers. And just because they were published, it meant that, theoretically, everybody would be able to access them. But with the advent, of course, of internet and the digitization, I would say, of data and the importance of digital data and the availability of internet to share the research products, it just exploded. And so I like the last part of the definition that talks more, it's about our, as scientists, as researchers, what do we need to do and what's our responsibilities, even an ethical responsibility or professional responsibility. So elements pertinent to a claim discovery are published so that the results can be repeated and validated. So this means that in this context of open science, we need to provide evidence of what we have done, and data is one important part of it. So, research data. What is research data? Let's try to understand what it is, because sometimes, people come to me and they say, I don't know what I need to publish. I mean, I know that I need to publish my papers, and that is important to me. But what is this research data, open data? So again, I put a little bit more of a little bit of definitions, but basically is not just the data that you have gathered, maybe created, observed during the course of a research project. It also implies now, especially again, because of the importance of data-driven science, of computational research, it also implies everything surrounding the data, documentation about how to interpret that data, how to use that data, what file formats are involved. What is this data set? It's not just a bunch of files, but it's also how to make sense of them, I would say. So what constitutes a data publication package is evolving, and it's getting more and more, I would say, demanding in a way. It has to be more complete. It's more complex. And then I like this definition: open data are online, free of cost, accessible data that can be used, reused, and distributed, provided that the data source is attributed, meaning the authors of this data have to be attributed. And it's a standalone product. Of course, it is linked to your paper, but it should be also a standalone product that others can interpret, understand, and reuse, because it is, its own entity, so to speak. And that's where curation comes on. So the main issue for us, the main takeaway is that, of course, data has an important role in upholding the research standards that we have known and that we have been educated in and that we understand when we take, our research methods, and the role in advanced discovery. So, replication, reproducibility, and reuse are. And these are the standards that uphold scientific endeavors. So for replication, an independent group of researchers conduct a replication of a study, including collecting and analyzing their own data to see if they get the same results as your original study. So, and this implies an evaluation of the quality of the research. Reproducibility is that an independent group of researchers analyze the data that you have published to see if they get the same results. This does not involve, and you may get the same results, but the results may be, bad, so to speak. But it's another way of upholding the standards. And reuse is when researchers take your data, they analyze it for something completely different than what your study did, or the reasons why your study gathered that data or created that data, observed that data. But in any case, for these three cases, data and the computer code that makes the data understandable, if applicable, they have to be made available. They have to be publicly available and well contextualized in order for this to happen. So these are the tenets of research and of modern research. So when did this all started? What happens with this? And there were strategic directions, and this is important for us to understand because we are in the context of an NSF project. And I'm just going to talk about what impacted my own career, so to speak. So I got my degree in 2009. But in 2007, the relevance of data-driven research was, I would say, articulated in various documents. Amongst these documents, the one that touched me because I started to work at TACC, I wanted to be as a data librarian. I wanted to be in the, in that wave of big data. And it was this document, and I linked all these documents. So when you get this PowerPoint presentation, you can look at all these documents. There was a cyber infrastructure vision. And it's interesting, this was 2007, and I wanted to, you will see not the logo, but the graph of what the Texas Advanced Computing Center cyber infrastructure looks today. And it means that it took all these years to achieve these research cyber infrastructure environment that facilitates, that is there, is a service for you to accomplish this vision, the importance, the relevance of data-driven science, and within that, computing research. So then NSF started to release grant proposals, or write grant proposals. And remember the 2009 DataNet, which was basically creating this catalog of data. Well, depends how you making data more available. That was the gist of that solicitation. I'm sorry, not grant proposal, but the iHarp, or the Harnessing Data Revolution, a, how do you say, suite of grant proposals or grant solicitations is a direct consequence of this vision that started in the early 2000s. This vision that data was going to enhance discoveries, data is enhancing discoveries, and improving and advancing science. So I put, this little, again, timeline, but the important things are in 2011, NSF started requiring data management plans, and I really have no idea of what, because I wasn't in iHarp at the beginning, but what you all said in the data management plans, but it was an attempt, it is an attempt, it still is an attempt, this two-pager that you have to attach to say, what are we going to do with the data that we produce? Where are we going to publish it? How are we going to protect it, to preserve it? How are we going to share it? And that is becoming more and more important as the federal government has issued these memos, 2013, but most important, the 2022, the OSTP Nelson memo, that I think is going to affect really our work immensely. I don't know exactly how NSF is going to respond to this memo. The agencies have until 2005 to respond to this memo, but basically the idea is that everything that the federal government pays for, all the data needs to be publicly available very soon as possible. Before you had to, you could do an embargo because you were only publishing the data when you were publishing your paper. Now you have to make this data available as soon as it is possible, as soon as it is curated. And I know that in July, I'm going to a panel with NOAA, NSF. This is for social science, natural hazards data. But I imagine that all the agencies are trying to understand how to comply with this memo. So that is from the strategic directions, from those that fund research, from the agencies that produce data that everybody uses. Many agencies produce data, but what was the response of the research community? And I want to just highlight, of course, that the first ones, or the early ones that really got into this bandwagon, were the academic libraries. And academic libraries immediately, they responded to these data management mandates with data repositories, implementing data repositories. I don't know if UMBC has a data repository. They also implemented curation training, data management training, and these repositories are spaces for individual universities in which all the researchers are free to deposit data so that to comply with this mandate of making the data available. The journals also started to shift their requirements, and they require some of them, I'm not saying all, but a data statement that says, where have you this data made? Where is your data? Where can others go and look at the evidence? Where others can find your data set? Some other journals have even a reproducibility review in which, and this is hard, but in which if you have created some software piece or a model, let's say, you provide all the elements so that the committee of the journal can test that your model with data, maybe you have to provide the two in an environment, can reproduce your results, which is, it's quite an endeavor. I can tell you that, for example, for all the AGU journals, you have to provide a data statement and you have to indicate where your data is published. Otherwise, AGU will not accept your paper. So that's a given, and that's it. That is, how they see their standards. Other journals, for example, in natural hazards engineering, they just request a data statement, but you in your data statement can say, if you need the data, consult with the researchers. So that doesn't imply this commitment to make the data so accessible. However, this is going to change with this latest memo, with this latest requirement. The research community also, again, from more of a data curation, data libraries concern, made what is called the FAIR data curation principles. And these are principles that we will revisit a little bit later, but it means that data has to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And all of this you will see what a curated data set is like, so that everybody can discover it just by putting, let's say, on Google search, polar data set, and you can find, on the internet or on aggregators like Google Data Search or other aggregators, you can find data. Then accessible means that you can download it, that you can really use it, no? Because it's just not only that you find something, but you can functionally, you can actively use the data, acquire that data and observe it or analyze it, etc. Interoperable means that you can integrate it easily, that you have the information, the metadata to aggregate it into your research or aggregate it into other data repositories. So it's interchangeable. And reusable, that you understand it, that you have enough context and understanding so that you can reuse this data. Because if I don't understand how, let's say, polar data, what instruments were used, what time frame, what context, it's like, okay, it's like a piece of art, you need to understand. In order to value it, you need to understand who the author was and what time it was made, with what supplies it was made. What is this thing? Do I understand its logic? Do I understand the context of how this was created? And then there are other principles that are becoming very important. Care for indigenous data governments. This is relatively new, but it applies to data that is under the purview of indigenous lands, and how they believe that this data is going to improve their economic and social development, which in fact is I think that these care principles that are more focused on the interests of the different communities or different communities, I think that this is going to have an impact also, that is going to be, I would say, translated into other communities. And it provides more emphasis on the importance of data as a social and economic catalyst, because for example, the government says, your data that was funded by the federal government, if you're a private company, use it to improve the economy, use it to, sell more products, to provide more jobs, to improve your communities. And so that's the idea. And then trust is it has to do with all the requirements that these institutional repositories should have in order to be trusted, all the functionalities that they have to be like the libraries or the archives of data for the next generation. So your data set that you have produced today has to be a data set that it can be understood in 10, 20, 30 years from now and can be reused in that timeline. And, with the technological changes and advances, that's very hard because, as we know, with digital data, it may be understandable today, but we don't know if it's going to be understandable in 2 years. And that's something that these trust principles try to address, and we'll talk a little bit about these. But all of these highlights the investment, the support, the guidance, the policies that are being released towards open research data. And this has really, skyrocketed in the last decade. But what about the researchers' attitudes? So there's some communities that have a tradition in data sharing and curation, and we can talk about biologists, and we can talk about botanists and archaeologists. They have always, that's what they do, basically. They describe data. That's their bread and butter. They used to do it with, specimens. Now they digitize the specimens, and they never had any issue with sharing data, never. But many other researchers from other domains, they have reservations, and there are differences in how these policies have affected them or have touched on them. So I can say that I work with natural hazards engineers, and I work with roboticists. And the natural hazards engineers have much more tradition of sharing data, especially the experimentalists. But roboticists, they have no, it's almost like they don't even know about these. They don't even, they just are learning about these. So different communities have taken these differently. But, many say, well, this is too much work. We have to curate and publish the data. This is too much work. This adds to our work. Who's paying for it? They have fear of data being misused, especially now with artificial intelligence. And they are like, okay, how do we know that somebody else is not going to use this data in a way that is not intended or to provide harm, etc. They also have this fear because, papers are refereed, but data, many of the repositories, especially these institutional repositories, not so much the domain science repositories, they don't have a lot of standards in curation. So you can just deposit your data. Nobody's looking at how well you have described it, or what standards are you using, or what file formats are you using. And so they're saying, well, if it's not refereed, how do I know that this is really quality, that this data is really something to be put out? When you have your journal publications or your conference proceedings are very they're very reviewed. What's happening with the data? They're also very afraid of competitive intelligence. Oh, if I release my data, somebody else is going to, use my data and publish another paper with it, and I don't want that to happen. They also have a concern about the lack of recognition for data publication, especially when tenure track is involved. It doesn't have, it doesn't have the value. So nobody is really, I'm doing all this work and I don't get credit, or I don't get, credit for it. And then this individual versus group effort, because it's not, normally data publications are group efforts, and when people are going for tenure, the group efforts apparently are not that important. But all of this is changing. I'm telling you, all of this is changing fast, and the benefits of publishing data are starting to show, and researchers' attitudes are changing. I see it now in robotics, I see it in natural hazards engineering. And one thing is true, and is that all researchers, what they all want is to have data available. They might not want to share the data, but they do want to have data available so that they can conduct their research. And so really there's a benefit to, the greater good, and that has to be taken into consideration. I want to have every other person's data set. Well, I need to put my share into it. And things are changing. Credit is being paid. NSF is recognizing data publications much more. And I think that things may be changing in tenure track, or, whatever. And journals are starting to because they demand that you publish your project with the data that provides evidence. That's a referee in a way. That's referee. They do evaluate data. So what is data curation? So for all of this to happen, so now this is the elephant in the room. What is data curation? So data curation is, that's a definition from the National Library of Medicine, but it's basically a process that starts at the beginning of your research. It should start at the beginning of your research process, and it goes all through the life cycle as data is, as your research project is designed, as you gather data, as you analyze the data, and then you publish your results, interpret the data, put the data for publication, and then somebody else reuses the data, or you version the data and it goes back again. So somebody reuses the data and publishes a new data set out of what has been already that integrates maybe your data set or transforms it, and the cycle keeps going. It's an interdisciplinary process. So it's not a one-time process. It's not a one-time, deal. Although a lot of people wait until the last minute to curate the data, that's not something that we librarians or data curators advocate, because that is when you get all this work that it's, who's going to pay for these? I have a mess and now I have to curate it to publish it. So it is a process that starts with your research planning, and that's why the data management plans come into play. It's an interdisciplinary activity, and I argue that it's not only just librarians and domain researchers, but computer scientists. So I think it's a three-legged approach, although now many domain researchers are also computational scientists. But I see the three legs here, especially because of the large data, complex data, digital data. It involves both collection level and content level curation. I have to describe this collection. And librarians, we are great at describing the collection level, the authors and the abstract and, basic things, the sizes and the provenance and basic collection level that you go, when you look for a book. But data is much more complex than that, specifically now with these large integrated multivariate data sets. And so the quality of the data, the logic of the data, the structure of the data that is so much related and embedded in the research process, the origin of the sources, that is a combination of work between the librarians and the domain researchers. The domain, each data set is a story. It's a story of your research. It should reflect and represent your research. And so there's so many, and I put all of these not in order, but it has to do with everything that you have to do, from the provenance and administrative documentation to select open file formats that can be interoperable and interused, from taking care of data sizes so you know what the storage capacity needs to be and how you're going to manipulate this data and where you are going to be able to analyze it, from the metadata, which means how can I describe this data so that others can understand it, the data quality so that it's not, garbage, etc., etc., etc. And also to understanding how to present this data so that others can reuse it. So the whole curation across the data lifecycle is a balance between managing your data for your research project, for your research that you are doing, and producing this standalone publication and research output that others can reuse. And throughout this process, you need to be working together. When I say computer scientist, and specifically talking to iHarp users, what I want to say is that we're talking about very huge data sets that need computational, basically what you are doing, but except that you put also a focus on labeling, assessing data quality, understanding the different, what entails a multivariate balanced data set. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So you need a computer scientist to help automating these processes, because you're not going to be looking at every single, data point to see whether it's skewed or it is, within a reasonable result or framework. And we'll talk about these. So curation begins at the research planning phase. Okay. So I want to show you this. Yes, this is experiment and data workflow design for curation of robotics data. This research project, this is not even, right now, it's not even an experiment that has been conducted. This is the layout of this experiment, and where we have mapped out the data that we are going to obtain, all these different data sets. Imagine in a research project, in a robotics research project, you have, you do an experiment, it's an experiment, and you have humans in the experiment, and you have different models of robots, and the robots are doing different things, and they are being tested in an environment. And there's, camera sensors on the robots, maybe 2-3 types of sensors on the robots. There are sensors on the humans. There are cameras in the environment that also, so you have multiple data sources. You have to plan that, map that out in order to understand what you're going to get, and then how you're going to analyze it, and what are the interpretations that you're going to do to that data, in order to then decide, okay, I'm going to then publish this. What is it that I'm going to publish? So what you're seeing here, and when I give you the PowerPoint, you can look, is the design. This experiment has not even, it has been conducted, a pilot last week, and I was the how do you say, I was the human tester. I had all these sensors put on me, and I was the one responding to the interaction with the encounters with the robots. But what I'm saying is that we had to map these out and understand what data products we're getting, where everything goes, in order to then be able to publish these data sets. So it starts here. And so you have organized data. And one of the researchers said, I'm so glad we did this, because last year, other experiments, it was a mess. We didn't know where this data was coming from, and the files, and they were not organized, and we didn't put a file naming convention on it. And now we have everything mapped out. We know where everything is and where it's going. So let's look into a curated polar data set. And what does a curated polar data set looks like? And I went to one of the repositories. It's in Norway. It's a national repository, and you will see where it is. And later you can click and go to the repository. But why this is a published curated polar data set? Well, it has a citation, first of all, and you see who created it. It has a DOI, which is a digital object identifier that you click, and it will always point you to where you can find and access this data set. It's a permanent, it's forever. And so the data is always going to be there, publicly available. It has temporal and spatial references. We know which data gathering instruments were used for this data set, to gather this data set. And here I thought snow and ice thickness data, there are sensors. The variables and file naming conventions are described for this data set. Data is accessible. The data is in an open format, JSON. It's JSON, and in fact, it's more. Well, if you look into, you will see that you can have it in different CSV, JSON LD, JSON, so all open formats that people can easily integrate and interoperate with. The data has an open license, meaning that it provides other people, without relinquishing your rights. The author is telling you, you can use it, you can do whatever you want with it, you can republish it if you want, you can integrate it, you can use it for commercial purposes. It's all for you, but please cite me. explain in your paper that you have used this data set and provide credit to me. Provide credit to the authors. And there's a metadata schema for polar data, for this type of polar data, meaning that there's a standardized way of describing this type of data. So this is a curated polar data set that you can find publicly available and you can use with no restrictions, but ethically you will cite if you have reused. And I believe, but I'm not an expert, that it has all the information that people will require if they want to use it. And if not, you know where the repository is and you can provide feedback and say, and there's a paper also related to it, so you can read the paper, etc. Of course, not all data publications are equal. And even in this repository, I found data sets that don't have a quarter of all of these requirements. So that has to do with how the, curation can be implemented. So there's something that is a little bit even more complicated. So I showed you this is observational data, what we saw before. This is sensor data. It's easy. I would say it's easy to, I won't say it's easy to, but it's easy to curate and it's easy even to verify its quality because you can say, well, this sensor data should go within this range. We can understand its completeness, etc. Curating machine learning data sets, which are the ones that you are using, training data sets in your models or to test your models, is a little bit more complicated. Of course, we know, and it's been published, that data curation improves modeling outcomes. I mean, that's a given. That's something that every research says. But there are very, very many challenges in curating machine learning data sets. And I have never curated a machine learning data set from Polar Sciences. And it, of course, depends on the files that you use. Some of you use images and you are labeling these images. Some others are using sensor data. Some others are using satellite imagery, remote sensing. So I have experience curating aerospace data, engineering data. I have experience in audio data. I don't have experience. So I'm here showing you some examples of working with computer scientist Weija, specifically Weija Hugh. This is all work that I've done with him to curate large scale, to analyze and see the quality of large scale data that can be used as training data sets. The challenges is the data diversity, as I already told you. Data integration, sometimes you have to integrate different sources of data to create a training data set. And data aggregation, or you have to aggregate. So integrate means, you have to integrate different variables from different data sources and data sets, and sometimes you have to aggregate similar data sets for years and years and years of data, but these data sets over time may be incomplete. So we have worked with Weija on various projects and various publications in which we looked into quality assessment based on curation principles. And some of these curation principles have to do with data completeness and complementation, meaning are these data sets complete? Do they complement each other or not? Where are the missing pieces? And so how am I going to select these data pieces so that I have a complete rendition, so that my data set for training is not biased? And by biased, I mean it's not skewed towards one variable and doesn't show other variables. For example, in natural hazards research, because of the of the fact that a lot of in this country, a lot of construction is timber, is wood construction, and it's not cement construction. If you have to make a machine learning model, you will have to, for the structural impact of hurricanes on any building structure, you will have to see, well, I need to cover for wood structures, I need to cover for cement structures. I mean, you have to see that your data set is balanced. if it's data that isn't been labeled, you have to understand whether the labeling has been also balanced, and whether you have gaps over time. If it's data sets that are, from observations that are years and years of observations, you have to make sure that the observations remain stable, in the sense that there are not gaps in these observations. So all of these large analyses require computational scientists to understand that there are no bias, that there's balance, diversity, that you can deal with the conflicts and the overlaps, that you can complement and assess the consistency of machine learning training data sets. So polar data, where to find it, where to share it. So I looked into this repository of repositories, which is a worldwide initiative, R3 Data. And there are 59 repositories with diverse types of polar science data from different regions. I was quite impressed at the amount of polar data. I'm not saying that this data is easy to navigate, that is complete. I'm just saying that I just copied, observations, satellite images, environmental data, databases, biospecimens, and it's everything under the sun. It's not just a ice sheet thickness like I showed you before. So there's a big diversity. I understand it might be difficult to navigate, and this is something that happens with open data. There are so many repositories, there are so many, there's confusion, or there's, the standards in how to describe data. I might say, ice sheet data, and somebody else may name that thing differently. And so we have two entries that are meaning to be the same, but they're not the same. The standards with which that data may be, the observation, the units, the way in which the location or the temporal description are expressed might be different. So it's complex. It's complex for a researcher to find, identify what they need, and put it all together in order to build, let's say, a machine learning model. And that this is why the emphasis on trying to standardize and to talk the same language across a domain is so important. And is as different domains get to the bandwagon of data at different times, then there's an issue. Okay, so then what's in for me? What's in for the reusers? What's in for the researchers that will put all this work in order to put their data out? So I just want to show you what a reuse workflow is. So data is generated, curated, analyzed by any project. A manuscript is written about the study that generated the data, and that's where people put more the emphasis. You want papers, but the journal is demanding that the data is made publicly available. So the data is published with a citation you saw and a DOI in an open repository. The author publishes the manuscript, includes the citation of the data in the reference section, like if it's any other paper. Someone reuses the data, cites the data, and the citation will appear in repository metrics and other venues like Google Data Search, Google Scholar Profiles, etc. So we are starting to see that the researchers are obtaining credit and they're obtaining citations in their Google Scholar profiles for the data sets that they have published. This is happening. This is a reality more and more and more. There's credit for the researcher. And I will just show you part of, in fact, it's so important that a lot of my work now is measuring impact, which is a little bit boring for me, but that's what it is. And in natural hazards engineering, with these impact metrics, meaning not only just citations for data reuse, but also downloads and views to the data that is in the repository. We can learn a lot about what people are looking for, what data is more reused. For example, in natural hazards engineering, the people that conduct simulations are the most frequent reusers of experimental data. But normally, unless the simulations are for benchmarks and yes, basically benchmarks and test beds, the simulation data won't be that much reused. And so these analysis helps manage the expectations of researchers and funders. And we understand, when data has been reused, how much time elapses from the publication until data is being reused, how many years pass by and a particular data sets or data sets are still being reused. And all of this information, we are learning more and more and more about data reuse and its value. And of course, well, the citations are the big important metric that everybody wants, the citations. And I want to show you like these, for example, Brady Cox, which is he has, for example, this dynamic characterization of Wellington, New Zealand data set cited by 11. And of course, he uses these for his promotion and everybody's super happy. Of course, this is, there are data sets that are, of course, more iconic, like everything else, like publications are more iconic than others, but you have a place where all of this is being, captured, so to speak. Just to end, you just cannot sit and say, oh, I published my data set and sit down. And this is something iHeart may be doing if they curate and publish their data set. Data has to be promoted so that others know about it. Because in the sea of data that you saw in the repositories, if you don't promote it, nobody's going to know about it. You promote your papers, you promote your work, you have to promote your data sets. So, for example, in DesignSafe, we have data awards, annual data awards to the data publications that really are impactful and contribute to the natural hazards engineering. We just recently gave an award to one data set that was really featured in the New York Times. So, that was very important to us and to NSF. And then we also publish data reuse stories. We identify people that have reused data published in DesignSafe, and we interview them. And we learn a lot about why they reuse data. So for you all, what are your opportunities and what are your responsibilities? I expect news soon about how to proceed in reference to the OSTP 2022 memorandum. And again, understanding better what iHeart's commitments to data publication are. But you have the opportunity to contribute with open, reliable, and unique data sets, especially machine learning. It's the whole idea of how to assess machine learning data sets is still very vague, and you have the opportunity to help not just the polar science community, but all the communities on how to do these assessments. To contribute with published models, because as I say, it's just not anymore the data, but you have to the software as well, and there are standards to do that. To inform how to curate training data in polar science, I said that. To inform how training data models should be archived and shared, because we know little about it. There aren't standards. And to improve and organize your research process, that's very important. And you have the obligation also to cite the data that you reuse in your models, whether it's yours or somebody else's. So I'm finished here. And let me see.
Yeah, you can stop sharing, I guess.
Yeah, I want to, is that, I can't find, I'm sorry that, no, I can't find where you are. I can't. You're sharing your screen. Stop. Okay. Here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Maria. Why don't we open it up to questions?
Yeah, I think it's, I can start, Maria. I think it's a very timely talk. iharp started of some time now. It's a good time to think about data curation. I think actually I have some data sets ready to be curated. I have my RU students here. They work on data sets. They found the data are not complete. There's something prefine them to try a machine model as a whole. So I wonder what's the steps ahead. Are you interested to do the data curation for iharp?
So first, I think the way that I think that we should proceed is that we need to understand a little bit better the panorama of repositories to see where these, where what. So the first step for a data curator is to get immersed in the science, because we are librarians, and so we are not domain specific people. So we need to understand the science. We need to understand what's the panorama of data repositories. Where should your data, because iharp doesn't have a data repository. iharp doesn't need to have. We saw that there are 59 data repositories. Maybe there's an opportunity to contribute with a data set to any of these repositories. So to have a panorama of what the story or what these data repositories are and where would iharp data fit. And maybe we find out that the iharp data fits in a UMBC data repository or whatever. We don't know that. So then we will have to, by understanding the different research projects that are happening and what they do, what they produce, to be able to see how we can make this documentation of this data set for iharp more uniform, more standardized. What is it that we need to describe? We will have to go and see what standards are for polar science. So we need to do, in short, we need to do a little bit of a survey. And of course, in the meantime, we can help you, curate and publish your data. But I suggest that we need to start looking into the so many research projects that iharp has and get a little bit into what are you doing to get an idea, so that we don't want to have, a different standard to publish bandanas data sets with, a different way or a different template or a different, we need to create a model a model meaning, okay, what are we talking when we are talking about iharp data? So that would be my approach to doing this.
I think this, as you were speaking, Maria, I was looking for Francis, and I think he was in some part of your presentation at least. Oh, he's still here. That's great. So Francis actually has been talking to several students and trying to collect through the survey who's using what type of data. So I think we are on that first step exactly as you described. And I think one of the challenges for us to think about is our charge is really to harness the data and models that are there. So, the 59 repositories you mentioned, we actually need almost a data catalog, which tells us that all of these categories and repositories are available so that we can leverage it, because it took us a long time to first learn that. And then now there are some places we are generating new data sets, like the K through 12 project that we did, where we did the feature mapping. There are some other projects where we're generating new data, but the new data generation is not as much as reusing existing data. That's the number one. But then this map of repositories, I think that's a missing piece for us, almost like we have all these 50 satellites and we have all these 50 repositories and we have all of this data. I think if iharp can even produce that panorama as you described very well, even that panorama is going to be very important for the research community, because many researchers starts from zero, like we did in some sense, right? And then we had to find all of these different pieces and say, okay, this data is for this one and that data is for that one. So I think if there's a way to achieve that panorama, that would be super helpful to advance the science of continuing to harness the data.
Yes.
I'm curious if you have ideas on how we go about that and how we create that panorama or catalog.
Yes, I do have. I do have ideas, and it will imply a little bit of understanding what your needs are, what your terms are, how do you look for things, what are the regions of interest, because, for example, let's say, and I don't know these, but let's say that none of you care about the plankton, just to say something, or none of you care about cores, or yes, or bio samples. And so we will have to narrow. So just by narrowing, we can have this panorama about regions and themes, and then start gathering data to make this catalog and say, these are the repositories, these are the data sets. I have a little plan that I did. Remember, we were going to have undergrad students doing this, although I feel like an undergrad won't perhaps be able to do this. You need more of a librarian to create this catalog, but I have a little plan for how to create this.
Back.
Yeah,
we should definitely circle back on this. I want to make sure if there are other questions, maybe we're at time, but are there other questions?
I have a quick one. So you said I totally agree. The data sharing current should start with the very beginning. Most of the repositories we saw right now, they are still at the last stage. When you have data, you just go there and upload. Do you know a website or something that help you to manage the data currents from beginning? Because from like even at the design phase of your project, you can go to the website and this is day one product, day two product, and maybe 2 years later you can collect them and be able to get eventual data products. Do they have a sort of software website to support that?
Many. And in fact, I really need to see if even UMBC has that support, because it should probably has it. Every research university has a website on their libraries that talk about specifically the data management planning and what that means. So you start by looking into very, what we would say, simplistic things. I mean, what's the prospect, for example, for any research project? What are the data formats that we are going to be working with and producing? Are these open formats? Can we change, from proprietary to open formats? Let's say you are using satellite data and these satellites are, private data and they are very obscure file formats. How can we change that into open formats? Let's say that you are you have to have an idea of the sizes so that you can plan on how you're going to manage this data. You will probably have to have an idea of how to organize the data and what file naming convention to use and who is going to be the record keeper within your project. There are so many strategies, and some of these strategies we already wrote in the documentation. You have the opportunity to use TACC as a shared space. And we even wrote in the documentation, very basic, I'm not saying that we wrote everything, but there are many websites that will basically point to the same thing. It's a lot of record keeping and a lot of discipline. And in each project, you should have a student or a researcher that is the record keeper, the data keeper for your project. And that person has to be the one that makes sure that everybody understands what everybody is doing and can say, okay, this is where we are going to, put the data that we are using for validation, or this is where I am going to put all the data sets that I have gathered from these different repositories that may be useful for this model, and I will put the source. And there are tons of what we call the record keeping system or the data keeping system. There are many websites and information that will help you with this. And a lot has to do with devising also your own processes and communicating your own processes across your small teams, and then seeing how these teams can create a guidance record keeping system for iHeart. So yes, there are many strategies. And
Thank you.
for all of you, I just want to say you all have to be good citizens. You all have to credit the data that you are using. And it's not just, yes, I mean, you're harnessing data from others, but you are creating new products, and you have to publish those new products, and you have to publish your models. And most of the time, the models require the training data set that you have used so that you can validate that. So there are also standards to publish software. You will have to publish that. That's why I talked about the evolution of what data, and we are out of time. But I know people, this is not something that it's a little bit harsh, but it will improve your research process.
Yeah.
So we can talk more.
I think this is an ongoing discussion, and I think we at least have some beginning threads of it with what Francis has been collecting, but also, across iHeart, we can set some standards too. So there'll be a lot more follow-up. If there's no other question, I just want to see there's something in the chat maybe. Oh, I think Jianwu posted a relevant repository as well. I know in our iHarp data management plan, we have mentioned TACC supercomputing storage and also Pangeo and other some repositories. But Maria, I'll send you a copy of our data management plan just so you have it. It has some language around TACC. And there's, as you start a project, there's always more nuances and more intricacies that come in, but hopefully we can talk more on those things too. So with that, I would like to thank Dr. Esteva for a wonderful, comprehensive talk. Thank you so much, Maria. And I hope to see you all next time when we have our Talk Tuesday. But in the meantime, enjoy the summer, and hopefully you're getting lots of work done. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.